Hi everyone, welcome to our panel session. Today I am joined by Chantelle and Felicity, and we will be talking about all things leading literacy change in schools. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we all come to this session and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And now I'd like to introduce myself. My name is NarissaLeung. I'm currently an education consultant. I am a former or reformed primary school principal, principal network chair, and now I work with schools on all things literacy and leadership. And I've had the good fortune to work with both Chantelle and Felicity. So that's how we've all come together today. So first I'll introduce Chantelle. So Chantelle Toteski she's a leading teacher at Epping Views Primary School, which is quite a large primary school in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. And I'll get you to give us a bit of context about your school, Chantelle.
Yeah, so Narissa, you're right. It is quite a large school in the northern suburbs, and it commenced in 2008 with around 30 students, and then we've got now around over 1,300 students. So we've got a number of classes. We've got 60 classrooms, 60 teachers that we have. Numbers are reducing. So we are seeing a decline due to new schools coming up in the area, but we've still got those numbers. So
it's an enormous school. It's a massive machine, isn't it? Really?
It is.
And then your role in the school?
So my role is I am a leading teacher, and I have been focusing on literacy over the last few years. The way that we've this year, our leadership structure is that we have sort of mini schools. So this year I'm looking after the year 2, 3 and 4 cohorts. So I do everything to do with those cohorts. So from planning to data to looking after the students and the teachers' wellbeing, working with all of the grads that we have. So we do have quite a young staff. So I do all the VIT processes with the graduate teachers. And then I look after literacy across the board, so from prep to year 6.
Yeah, wow. It's a big board. Thank you. Okay, so now Felicity Rasminsky from Sunbury Heights Primary School. Normally I would say a medium-sized primary school, but since Chantelle's school is so enormous, I'll say small to medium, in the northwestern suburbs, I'd say just outside Melbourne, sort of on the regional metro border. And you're a learning specialist. So did you want to give us a bit of context about your school?
Sure. So at Sunbury Heights Primary School, we have around 400 students. So my role in the school is a learning specialist focusing on literacy, and there are 2 learning specialists at my school. So I am very fortunate to have 2 days in a classroom and 3 days out of the classroom to work on my role to improve literacy initiatives across the school from foundation to year 6. On my 3 days, so as well as working on those initiatives, I go to each team's planning session to help plan for literacy and that consistency across the school. Professional observations has also been a very big push across the school, and working with teachers and coaching around literacy. So they're probably the main focus.
Yeah, it's an interesting role, the learning specialist, because you still have your own class.
Yeah.
So you've got half of your brain sort of portioned off to be thinking about your student needs, and then you've got the other half portioned off to think about the needs of or supporting the teachers, which is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess a challenge at times too. So good, well done.
Yeah,
now,
thank you.
I'll start with you, Chantelle. Your school's been working on changing or leading change in reading, with a focus on reading, for probably the last 4 years. So I'm wondering if you can help give some context about why, out of everything, did you choose reading change?
Yeah, so our reading has been our focus for the last few years, and the reason why we decided this was because our data, when having a look at all of our data was quite low. And when investigating a little bit more around this, we noticed that our students were quite compliant in reading, but that engagement and that accountability and that real love for reading wasn't quite evident across the board. So that was really our push. And when I had done the Basto Leading Literacy course in 2017, I think it was, having a look at some different research and some different instructional models sort of got us thinking about what we could do to better our practice and in turn our student learning.
So can you tell me a bit about, I mean, it's obviously a really big school, so leading change in a large school. What are some of the things that you've trialed in terms of leading that change around reading in your school?
Yes, so it has been quite a long journey, to be honest, Narissa, and our school is, our leadership team is very big on ensuring that, because it is such a big school, that any change that we do put in place has been well researched. There's evidence backing it, and it's not just something that we decide quite easily. So I had a bit of a journey that I had to go on to even just bring my ideas to the leadership team. So the first thing that I did was lots of research. So as a leader, just researching different instructional models, different reading programs, having a look at what research was suggesting best practice was in reading. I did a number of school visits to get an idea of what other similar schools to Epping Views were doing, but also to go and have a look at some other schools out of our area that were quite high performing to see if there was any differences or anything that I could take on board. And based on all of my learning, I quickly worked out that for our school, there wasn't going to be a model that we could just pick up and run with, that there was going to have to be some investigating and trialing and really thinking about our clientele and our students and our teachers and what would be a best fit for us. So that did take quite a while, but once I collated all of my information and my thoughts, I then brought my proposal, a very detailed proposal, to my leadership team, where I proposed that we had a bit of a change in structure, and that we trialled that with just a group of students, teachers, so on a real small scale. So my proposal was that we trialled it with 4 Year 1 teachers. We had, at this stage, 10 Year 1 classes. So when I say small, it was, you know, quite a small group of teachers. And that was actually approved. And the group of teachers that I decided to work with, I really wanted a range of abilities, so and experience. So we had a graduate teacher who was her first year out. I had a very experienced teacher who was quite close to the end of her career. We had a team leader, so there was a leader in there, and then a teacher who was around 5 years out. And within that team, I suppose I really needed to think about the leadership style that I wanted to take on board with this team. And I really wanted them to come along the journey with me. And I wanted that learning to be collaborative. And I wanted us to come up with what the process looked like. Even though I already had what I had thought and all the research that I had put in place, changes and learning still needed to occur. So within that group, we started our trial, and we did as much learning around reading as we could. We investigated, we trialed things, and that helped us put together a model that we thought would work with our students.
Because I think one of the key parts of that trial was just how closely you were monitoring the impact of it, so that you could say, is this effective? Is it not effective? Is it worth taking to other classes? I think that was really important.
Yeah, and you're right, we did do that along the way. So we had things like we took some pre-testing of our students' reading levels, and then we did some post-testing, and we compared that to the classes that obviously weren't in our trial. We did teacher surveys, student surveys, anecdotal notes were really big, and especially to try to gauge how the students were with their engagement levels and things like that. And once we analysed all of that information, it was really powerful, because we had the group of teachers and students that were trialling this new model, and then we had the students in the exact same year level that were doing the different model, and we could really compare the impact that what we were doing had on the students. And I think, Narissa, that was one of the most powerful things that we could take back to the leadership team to really support what we were saying. Because it's one thing, I suppose, saying this is what we believe and this is what we think, but when you have that evidence and that data to really drive your conversation and to fall back on, it's so much more powerful.
And from your own students, that you've tested it in your own setting and said, this is actually the data is saying to us, this is effective for our kids in our context.
Definitely.
Yeah,
and the surveys really pulled that out, Narissa, because you could pull quotes from what the children were actually saying from that. So
thank you. Now, I'm keen to hear, Felicity, you've been listening. Your setting is slightly different to Chantelle, who uses the terms for teachers as a small sample. Your school's been focusing on writing or bringing about change in their writing. So can you give us a bit of background on why writing out of everything, and what are some of the things that your school has trialled on their journey in improving writing instruction?
Sure. So I started at my school last year. So I spent a lot of time understanding where the school was currently at, and it was already on its journey for change in writing. Writing was the focus, again, because of the data. When we looked at the data and the downwards trend that was happening across the school from foundation to 6, we needed to work out why. Why was this happening to our kids if this was the data that was being presented? So we had to kind of unpack what was happening across the school. So I was very fortunate that I have been a part of most teams, and I could see that there was amazing things happening in each team, but what was lacking was that consistency across the school. So that's kind of where we headed with that of, number one, how is writing being taught at Sunbury Heights Primary School? So we unpacked the workshop model, the gradual release model, and we came up with staff input, our own Sunbury Heights literacy workshop model. So this took a long time to achieve, and a lot of staff input and buy-in as well around this. And then from that, we started to look at the elements of the model. So really unpack and dig deep of what does the mini lesson look like? What is a good learning intention and success criteria? What is happening in the work time? So we really unpacked the workshop model. We had a real focus on the mini lesson and giving teachers time to trial and implement different writing styles, modelled writing, guided writing, shared writing, and then having a lot of discussion around where we're heading as a school, and also the importance of explicit modelling and think alouds during that time, so kids can see it in practice. And I think that's been a big shift and a big drive for us in particular. So the workshop model, when it was completed by all staff and all staff had a say in it, it is now evident in each classroom.
So can I just ask that the support that you provided for the teachers, to me sounds like you're supporting them via professional development, but then by time to implement the learning from the development, and then following that up with discussion about what have you trialed, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what are your questions? And I think that's probably similar for you, Chantelle. So
absolutely.
Do you think that's been the key to getting that teacher buy-in and that consistency?
Absolutely. And I think, like in any school, professional learning time as a whole school is so valuable and so important. So that time to present to staff, have that discussion and giving them time in their classrooms. And then with my support, I was able to then go into classrooms to help model and coach staff to what different elements look like with their focus.
Yeah, because that for me, that sounds like a consistent element between both of your settings, is that really that understanding of, how long change takes and how much support you need to provide to your teachers. And it's not just a one-off PD that's going to bring about whole school change in anything. It's been, for Epping Views, it's been a 4-year journey of constant ongoing support. And just different types of support too, I think, like professional development support, you going in and helping with planning support in time in terms of time to talk about the changes. So I think that's a really important element that teachers need to, or leaders need to ensure that they're providing that time for that ongoing professional development and support for their teachers.
Yeah.
Can you give me some ideas about, not everything works in change leadership. And there's no one perfect way of leading change in a school because it's so reliant on context. Have you had any sort of false starts in your change leadership journey where you've gone down a path of this is how we think this is going to roll out, and then you've thought, oh, actually this isn't working, we need to change how we're leading this change? Any comments on that?
I think, like, coming in personally, I was like, full throttle. Yes, let's get this done. Let's implement change. Let's move this along. When you need to know, hey, you need to pump the brakes, and things take time. It's a slow and steady process, that's for sure. And when I came into the school, the 6+1 traits were a big focus in the school. But as it's not just all about literacy in a school. There is wellbeing, there is PLC, there is numeracy, and sometimes things start to drop off. And so all of a sudden at one meeting, it's like, oh, what's happened to the 6+1 traits that we were raving on about? And so certainly things do drop off, and I think that just happens in every school. And it's very reflective on, well, what do we need to do and what's the next step and how can we bring that back in?
Yeah, that's right. And just being, I guess, having an awareness of that, the fact that it has dropped off. But it's never easy because we do always need to bring in and talk about new things and acknowledge that, unfortunately, school isn't just about literacy. Yeah. It'd be easy if it was. Chantelle, have you got any comments?
Yeah, we were, I was quite similar, Felicity, when I first started this journey. I had time to wrap my head around it and do all the research, and I had everything that I wanted to change in terms of reading. And when I mean everything, I mean there was a list of things, that
I remember those early conversations, yeah.
Yes, that I really wanted to change. And I went in wanting to do everything at once, and it was all in our AIP and it was ready to go. And then when we actually started, I realized, okay, we need to pull back, and I might need to have a bit of a plan of when these things are actually going to be implemented, and even discussed with teachers. So really pulling back and prioritizing what's the most important thing, what's going to give us the most impact as quickly as we can. So that was probably one of the hardest things for me as a leader to actually acknowledge and to really, I suppose, prioritize, and it does take time. Like you said, Narissa, we've been on our 4-year journey and we're just starting now to get to that end, and we're starting to see some results, which is really great. But definitely pull back one thing at a time, get your teachers on board, and that content knowledge for your teachers is so important.
Yeah, it is that. I think that's the key to all change in a school. I was the same even as a principal. I was so excited. I've always been fascinated by change leadership, but even as a principal, I was so excited. Just everyone needs to come on board with the change right now and we can get this done. But you really have to work with the people if you want. There's a saying that I really love about change leadership, and they say, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And so it's really about acknowledging that actually there are other people in this school and I've got to bring them along with me if we want this to go far, and we don't want this to completely fall off the burner and, in 3 years' time be saying, oh, yeah, we did reading once, didn't we? So I think that's an important point. Now, just any advice that you're a bit of the way into your leadership journey now, any advice you have for others about, if they're thinking about leading a literacy change in their school? Do you have any advice that you could, or that you wish you had someone had whispered in your ear when you first started leading this change?
My advice probably would be for you to have as much knowledge as you can around whatever you're deciding to change within the school. I think that's really important. You don't need to know everything, but just to have enough to be able to, have those really in-depth conversations and speak to other staff around why you're wanting the change to occur. And I think it's really important to remember that take your time. It's not going to happen all at once. Provide your staff with the professional learning. The resources is a really big one as well. If you're wanting change, they are needing the resources to help guide that. And I suppose just trial and error. And if something doesn't work, coming back together and reevaluating, working out where to next. Don't, try to keep going with something that's not working.
And I think that's probably also that you've always got to keep your eye on what impact is this having. Is it having the impact we wanted it to have? How do we know? Should we stay the course? Do we need to adjust the course? Just that constant awareness of the impact, I think, is really important. Felicity, any advice you'd like to whisper back to yourself?
Mine would be similar to Chantelle. I think start small, have big dreams, of course, but start small. Make the change relevant to your school at that given time. Make it purposeful and meaningful so staff can see the path that you're taking them down. Include staff along the way where you can. And I think even though you are known as the expert in the school, you don't have to know all of the answers all of the time. There are, so much research and evidence and things out there that, take your time, get to know that, like Chantelle said, and you don't have to know everything all of the time, and you're not alone on the journey. Like, get the school involved. Everyone is there by your side. Everyone's there to support you, and know that, it does take time.
And one of the things that I just sort of point out just before we finish up, because our 20 minutes is already nearly there. I could talk about this all day. I just love talking about literacy leadership. Something that both of you mentioned at the start is the time that it took you and your schools to work out what's our current practice. Before we go and launch into finding a new program or approach, you spent so much time learning about what's our current approach. So we know the strengths and we know who we can draw on and we know where we're working from. And so we can work from there rather than sort of not appreciating or understanding or valuing current practice and saying everything you're doing is wrong. Here's the new and right way. So I think that's important, just that time at the start, because we sometimes dive into finding a solution, but we haven't even worked out what our actual problem is yet. So I think that's important. And you've both done it so well, which is why I think you're really starting to see some positive results in both of your settings. Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey, and good luck with the rest of it. It never ends, our work. We know that as teachers. So good luck in all of the work that you're doing. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Narissa.